Hey there, everyone. Welcome to the Cordell Cordell virtual town hall. I'm Scott Trout, CEO and managing partner of Cordell Cordell, and thanks for joining. And again, today we're here to bring you really some of the best guests that we have around the country. And today's unique topic, one, as I was talking offline, that you often don't hear from divorce lawyers, and that is alternatives to divorce. And that includes marital counseling, considering that as an option. And we're going to talk about all of those types of alternatives as well, in addition to counseling. And today we are really grateful to have a guest who really has an expertise in this area. And we're joined by Angela, who's the owner and operator of St. Louis Marriage Therapy. And she's a licensed marriage and family therapist who really is here to shed some light on the alternative for divorce for us today. And we're going to get to that. And as always, during the town hall, we'll have an opportunity to ask questions and take questions from you, not only of our guest, but we're going to spend about 15 minutes or so with Angela. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the questions I have. I know that you as well have, and considering that as an option, whether or not there's something that's right for you and your spouse. And then the second half of our town hall, we're just going to take questions about anything, any topic you have related to family law. I'm joined also with Jonathan Wynn, who's one of our partners up in our Utah office. So first, I want to introduce Angela and bring her and welcome into the show. Angela, thanks again so much for joining us and everyone watching today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's exciting. And so it's really a great topic to start the year. Now, we just rolled out of kind of a National Divorce Month or National Divorce Day in January, where you see that post-holiday surge in divorce filings. And I think that's just such an appropriate thing to talk about. It's something I shared offline with Angela that we have really discussed for many years at Cordell Cordell, and that before you really consider, you have to make that decision that your marriage is irretrievably broken, that you can't be saved, and there are no other options for you. And that's why we thought this is good to start the year off and talk really about this topic specifically. And so we're going to do that. So what I want you to do is submit your questions in the Q&A section right now. And as we talk with Angela and Jonathan and I ask questions, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to toss those over to Angela, or we can answer them for you in that first 15 minutes. And then in the second half, we'll get to your general questions that and they don't have to relate to therapy or counseling or any of the things. We'll talk about postnuptial agreements here later on as well. We want to open the floor up to you, get you the answers. Now, keep in mind, as always, we can't give you legal advice in this forum. This is an educational, informational opportunity for you, and a moment for us to just take some notes and take that next step. And that is, if you need legal advice, you have to do so in a consultation with a lawyer and not in this broad forum. So keep in mind, obviously, when you're asking your questions, just love to hear them. You can include a first name or no name, just where you're located. State is fine. If you want to include the city, that's okay too. We'll try to get those to you. But let's get started in just a minute. We're going to take a very, very quick break. We'll come right back. We'll get right with our guest speaker, Angela.
Fathers play a critical role in a kid's life. That doesn't change for single fathers. Cordell Cordell is dedicated to protecting that role because we are a champion for fathers' rights. Kids count on fathers. Fathers can count on us.
All right, welcome back. Let's get to it, Angela. I know we're going to have a lot of questions. One's already rolling in. We want to get to those, and we want to answer the questions that everyone's questioning about therapy. And so here's the question I was thinking about, and you and I talked about this offline a bit, and Jonathan, certainly you can chime in on any questions you have. And it really is, where do you start? We have consultations all the time. They come in the door and they say, look, I think we need a divorce. And so I'm looking to you, Angela. I'm going to say, look, is it something, where does a guy start? What does he think about? What should he be asking you? What questions should he have of you? Or what should she have of you in terms of, is this right for me? Is therapy or counseling right for me?
Well, thank you for asking. So it's a tall order, right? I mean, especially when somebody's thinking about divorce, I'm sure there's a lot going through their head. Most people who get to the point of divorce have been struggling with their relationships for a very long time. So the idea of stopping, I guess, that process and then deciding, should I do therapy instead, might feel like a hindrance to this is where I'm at. I feel like I've already grieved the loss. And so one of the things I actually get people thinking about is, Are they, I kind of see it as like when you get close to divorce, there's this like line that people cross that once they've crossed it, they're really not coming back from it. They've grieved the loss of the relationship and they're really just done and over it. But like there's a new then process of like figuring out who they are going to be as single people. People like that, when they have made the decision to divorce, feel a sense of relief. Like, I'm finally doing this. I'm over this. I just want to move on. That's what I look for when somebody's closer to the side of like, I just want to move on and divorce. But when people are teetering, like anxious and like, I'm not sure, should I not? That's still a space where work can be done. And where it might be of value actually to, instead of going just like plunging forward and deciding I'm going to divorce because that's the only option, is that's the space of, if you're teetering and you're not sure, then come see a therapist. I do encourage a couples therapist, somebody who's trained to work with two people, because there is a difference, by the way, of like the couples therapists have at least been trained to work with more than one person, and they're trained in looking at the interactive patterns between couples, whereas sometimes individual therapists, they're very like one-way centered.
Right. I mean, that was my next question was, obviously we talk about therapy and counseling, and I want to kind of talk about whether there's a difference, right? But the next question was, is it individual or, or couples therapy? And why? Obviously, why do couples, if, there are issues on one side or not, or how do you see that as being more effective? Because I know guys are sitting here, they're going, okay, I get it. Maybe I have reflection that I need some work, but we need some work. So why couples
Here's how I
therapy
help them make that decision. So there's two answers to the question. Okay. The first one is, how do I personally make the decision of I'm going to do an individual counselor or a couples counselor? If you are in a position individually where you're just not sure if you even want to put the work into the relationship, that's a good space for individual therapy, because for couples therapy, the two-way street thing is a big part of couples therapy. I'm doing work, you're doing work, and we both have to put some energy and effort into this relationship. So earlier, before we started the show, we talked about you can't do couples therapy with only one person doing the work and the other person not.
Right.
So if you're in a space of, I'm just not sure, I don't know where to go with things, I want to figure out if therapy could be an option, then individual work can be a great opportunity to explore that without your partner. But I want to answer the second question too, which is how do you find a therapist, and who is a good couples versus an individual therapist? My license is actually an LMFT, which is a licensed marriage and family therapist. And that signals that this person has been trained to work with more than one person in the room. If you are doing individual counseling, any of the licenses have been trained to do individual work. But that LMFT really is the focus. And no, I've worked with more than one person. I am trained to help people figure out different ideas. And one area that just makes me a little different from even a couples therapist is that I've also got the added certification as a sex therapist. And not all marriage therapists are sex therapists. So I do want to put that out there. Like, there are some marriage therapists that are quite conservative and they'll like dance around the topic, but they won't go there. So
right.
In addition, if you are struggling with sexuality issues, then I really strongly urge clients to look for both, like a marriage and a sex therapist. So you can go there, because a lot of people, that's why they're considering divorces. They've struggled with desire or intimacy, and they're just not sure if they want to move forward if they're not going to have a sex life.
Those are such key, huge issues. And interesting that you mentioned that not all therapists are sex therapists, because those are interwoven into some of those problems. And I guess, okay, so you jointly make an appointment with Angela, and then you both come in, or are you coming in individually? Guys are thinking, okay, how do I start this? My spouse doesn't want to go with me. Or how do they convince their spouse? How do you help facilitate those joint discusussions?
So my first part of therapy, I usually try to see a couple together, because I am watching them like hawks, like a hawk. Like, I'm like, all right, what's the interaction pattern? What's this person saying that this person not hearing or understanding? And what's the message in between? So 93% of communication is nonverbal. And that's what I've been trained to do as a couples therapist, is look at those interactions that are nonverbal. So not what they're saying, but what they're meaning, essentially. So in that first session, that's what I'm paying a lot of attention to, is how are they interacting? How are they hearing or not hearing each other? Where's this person feeling resentment versus this person? Then what I do is I break couples down into individual level. So I'll do one session for each couple just to give them a space to know that I'm on their side. It's really a trust building session, but there's a way that like people feel like she's going to blame me. She's going to blame me. And I really don't care to blame anyone. I understand it takes two to tango, but everybody has that fear. And so that individual session is a space for us to build trust, for me to hear their story on their terms, and to give them that reminder that, no, I'm on your side and I'm on your side. I'm just kind of like a chess player trying to get them moving in a direction.
Right.
On the same team would be even better as opposed to opposing sides.
Yeah, right. It's like taking two separate pieces of yarn and trying to make a wonderful sweater and knit that together.
If that's what they want to be. Some people don't want to be.
Right. Right. Exactly. It's so interesting. So on average, let's think about, you're meeting with people and they're thinking, okay, how long is this going to take? What do I have to invest in? Typically, how many sessions, how frequent, how long? They all want to know the temperature of the water before they put their toe in. So what are you seeing typically? I know everyone's different. Everyone's unique, like a divorce. Some take 6 months, some take 6 years. What are you kind of thinking, to tell people out there what they're getting into?
Well, I'm going to answer this two ways: what I see and what should happen. Okay.
Yeah,
so
right.
What typically is happening is when people are in the midst of crisis, they come in for around 3 months. That's about like a season is about how long it takes for people to move through a crisis phase. And so the most common thing that couples will do is they'll come in for about 10-ish sessions, get through the crisis phase, and then they'll feel a little better and they'll move on with their lives. Where I would like it to be is like for real behavior change to occur. Like if you got to think of how you've been interacting with a person. If you've been married for 10 years, 3 months of time is not going to be strong enough to get you into really solid behavior change. And so what I would love to see my clients do, and where my most success is when people move past that crisis phase, they're actually starting to feel steady and okay. And now that's when the real learning happens. Because if you think of this in terms of the fight or flight response, when people are in fight or flight, that crisis phase, they're actually not taking in as much information. Like your brain zeroes in and only takes as much information as it needs to get out of that situation. And so that 3-month period, that's all they're doing is they take in enough information to get out of the crisis. But where real deep learning occurs is when you're out of that, when you're in your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your pause and plan mode. And that's that learning space where I can take in these skills and information and actually apply it in a more effective way. So for me, some of my best sessions and treatments have been more in the 6 month to a year phase. But I also understand like there's different reasons why people can stay or not stay for very long. So one of the things I'll adjust for clients is, can you, you don't have to see me every week. Maybe you see me every other week. Maybe you see every third or a month, so that we can get some of that skill building in, but that it can really solidly stick, as opposed to, all right, we did it, but it's over now. And then back to their old patterns.
You kind of mentioned at the beginning that sometimes when you get people, they're already past that grieving stage, almost like it's too late. And maybe a lot of our viewers are kind of in that stage already if they're listening to us. But what are some like warning signs that can tell people kind of early on, hey, we should probably go to a couples therapy early rather than waiting for it to get to that critical point?
I love that you asked that, Jonathan, because the average couple waits 7 years after they're struggling and having problems before they come see me. And if I could get people to come in at an earlier phase, the work is easier, right? So it's harder when you've broken your arm and then you didn't go to a doctor and you kind of just like, saw what happened, and then 7 years passes. And now you're like, hey, doc, can you fix this? It doesn't really work well. This is what people are doing with their marriages. And this is why it's so difficult when somebody's on the brink of divorce for me to do this work, because we are dealing with the compound interest of problems over time. So the things I would want you to look for is turning points. How I describe a turning point is a moment where you see your partner differently. The first moment where you see them differently, where you think, wow, I've lost a little respect for them. Or wow, I don't know that they'll be able to be this for me. Whatever version of them that you saw them as, that you wanted them to be as a partner, that you find yourself shifting, those are turning points. And there are often quite a few turning points that people move through before they start grieving that loss of every time that turning point happens is a moment where they grieve. They're like, you're just not going to be my friend. I just can't share things like this with you. Those are the points where I don't want you to sit and like start essentially rolling that resentment into deeper and more bitter challenges for us to work with now, like after you're ready to divorce. Like as soon as you start seeing that sense of, wow, my view of you, my perspective of you has changed, and not in a good way. Like there's ways you can see your partner in a new way that are like, oh, that's really cool, I like that about them. But I mean like where you lose respect or you lose trust or safety. Those are the spaces where once that happens, I would want people coming into therapy.
Yeah. Don't forget, ask your questions in the Q&A section right now before we have to let Angela go. I know Angela, we could keep you on for a couple hours. I'm so intrigued by the topic because I see a lot of parallels between, what you do, what we do in some regards, in that, some of the things I always talk about with clients is I like to be direct. You're going to hear very, very directly from me what I think is the best case, the worst case, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it because I think, everything's on the line. And if you need to trust someone like a counselor, a therapist, whatever it may be. Imagine you have to have those moments when you have a client that you have to be fairly direct with them, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I actually often say that therapists and lawyers are doing the exact same job, just in a different direction, or at least family therapy lawyers. But absolutely, I'm a very direct, tell it like it is therapist. However, I have learned to do it tactfully. I'm also the kind of person that like has that foot and mouth syndrome where I'll just say things kind of crassly. So I have learned to be delicate in the way that I do it. But I think it's very important for people to know what to expect and what the reality is. Like, for example, if one client is really done and like just over it and there's not bringing them back, but the other person's still in it, then we have a new job in therapy, which might mean helping this client come to terms with where this client's at. And that's I can't like strong arm somebody back from the end of the road, right? Like that is a very personal decision. And once somebody has grieved the loss of a relationship, it's not something you come back from. You're just done and you're relieved to be over with it.
There's a question that came in, Angela, and it's interesting because it is a little bit on the side topic from the marriage perspective. It says, do you recommend co-parenting counseling for parents, even if we get along most of the time? So I'm assuming by that question, it's about how do they parent their kids rather than they get along most of the time. It's a very specific use of the word. I watch words because words matter and words speak volumes about what they use. So what do you think?
Absolutely. I love co-parenting therapy. One of my first experiences, I got trained in Oregon for my master's, and it was a couple who sat in the office and they said, we want to make sure that we co-parent respectfully and successfully. Even if you get along, there can be pinch points, areas where you kind of struggle with how do we move forward. You can come up with ways to keep routines very similar in both households, but you can also learn things about how do we respect that the rules of this home are going to be different than the rules of this home, and how do we create transitions that make that easier, for example. Just an example of that is like, say in this household, we kind of run the ship like this, but in this household, it's a little more relaxed. Even doing a transition for your children, like when they first come into your home, by basically saying, hey, just remember, this is the way we do things here. Well, I was going to say coffee, but not everybody has coffee with their children. It depends on if you were raised more specific. But like, have juice with your kids essentially. And, just remind them, like, this is what happens in this household. I know you might do this at your dad's or your mom's house, but like, remember, this is how things go in our household. So they're resetting their expectations. And then that flow and transition becomes easier. And if both homes are doing some version of that, then you're also teaching your kid a valuable resilience lesson around here's how you transition from different locations.
Right. With the co-parenting therapy side of it, which is really, after you've separated and how to get along now as maybe not romantic partners, but parenting partners. When should they start that?
As soon as they feel comfortable doing so. I know that's like a blanket statement, but when people are going through certain aspects of divorce, there are just things you can't touch sometimes. And so I would very deeply honor wherever your emotional process is in that space. I know that as a part of divorce, there's a class people have to take in order to divorce. So it could be after taking that class. It could be if they feel like comfortable enough to start it, they could start it as a part of the divorce process. I've worked with couples who do some version of that, where they are setting some goals or intentions for how they want to work together better as a team. And so the answer is whenever you feel like you're ready to approach that as a team. The earlier, I think, would be the better, because then there are ways, even as they're separating the children, for example. Like I've had couples where when the new parent, or I won't say the new parent, when the parent with the new household, like somebody usually has to get a new household somewhere, right? Well, you can include a child in that transition. Like the first time you get the new apartment, you can take a child and have them run around the empty apartment and like brainstorm with their parent, like, here's where you'll be and what do you want to do and how do you want to make this space your own? So the earlier that a couple can work with that, then the more calming and relaxing that can be for a child in their transition period through divorce too.
I like that idea. I think a lot of clients, because they have family law professionals, they kind of look to us to kind of provide that co-parenting therapy. And, one thing we can talk about is usually a therapist is a little bit cheaper than an attorney, and it's going to be a good savings for clients to kind of have that therapist involved throughout the divorce rather than kind of relying on the attorney to give them therapeutic advice. Is there any sort of insurance coverage sometimes for this kind of thing?
Yes, every therapist is different on whether they take insurance or not. So some therapists are in network with some insurance panels. The way to find those is to go on your insurance card and like go on the website and find people who are in network. Some therapists, I'm one of these therapists, so I am private pay, but I will give people invoices to bill out of network so they can still see access out of network benefits if they have them. And then some therapists are like, yeah, I'm private pay. I don't want to do any of that. So there's everywhere in between, and it's just find what works for you. And then also most of us take HSAs or flex spending as well.
Right. We got another question, Angela, and I promise it'll be the last one. We won't keep your time. I appreciate it. So this comes from Joseph and wants to know, do you ever recommend a period of separation instead of divorce?
Oh, yeah, of course. If you're not sure and you just want to like take some time away from each other to see, can we live on our own? Will we miss each other? Actually, that's the most common reason why people will do a separation is they want to know, will I miss you? Like, it's almost a trial divorce or a trial. Like, can we be separate and feel that sense of liveliness or connection again? I will say there's pros and cons, though. The research suggests that upwards of 80% of people who do separate will typically move towards divorce. However, where there's some missing pieces in that research is they don't talk about whether they're doing it in sort of a therapeutic approach. So when I suggest, when clients talk to me about doing a trial separation, then I suggest they do it in a sort of therapeutic way, which might look like, let's do some couples counseling while we're doing it. Maybe we're both doing some individual counseling to explore on our own. Do we want this? Do I not want this? What am I struggling with? How do I figure out these answers for myself? Sometimes couples will also include like a date night associated with that, because if they're attempting to reconnect, but like create some distance around that, then a date night, which is very much like courting again, is meant to help them re-feel some of those feelings again if they can. But also part of that separation, I think, is clarity for people. Like they feel like they're so tied into all the emotions around it that they just need some distance and separation from the situation, especially when things get violent, by the way, because I don't know how much you guys talk about that, but sometimes violence is a part of considering divorce. So a separation can give like a cooling off period and a reminder that I'm not going to live with violence. This isn't going to be okay for me.
That's almost the dividing line of where I have said, counseling's not really an option. If you're physically violent, that's just not an option for you, because I don't know where that is an acceptable even change and where you can have that trust relationship. So it's such an interesting dynamic.
Well,
and go ahead.
Do a different idea on that. Like I actually do couples therapy with people who engage in intimate partner violence. Like actually some of my training was working with couples who very much loved each other and wanted to be together, but had some old traumatic patterns that were repeating in their marriages and their relationships. So I wouldn't necessarily say that domestic violence is a deal killer for working on it, but I don't want domestic violence to continue. Right. Like we're going to work on this. We're going to work on removing that and developing new ways of interacting that don't include violence.
Yeah.
And one thing I like about your conversation the two of you had is it kind of shows the importance of when you're going through these kind of issues, you need to have a team of professionals. You can't just rely on one person. You need the perspective of, the legal side on one side, the therapeutic side on the other side. Because often to many, you look at any other aspect of our life, you're going to go to a doctor, you're going to have a team of professionals working on it. You're going to have an anesthesiologist, you're going to have a surgeon, you're going to have nurses. So likewise, having an attorney as part of that team, a good attorney who understands family law, along with a good family law therapist, you can work together and kind of understand the pros and cons. A great example is a temporary separation. There's so many negative things that could result from that in a divorce later on that you got to be careful and kind of understand, what how do I structure this separation that can focus on my marriage, but also protect me if things don't go well, that they're not going to use this against me. And all of a sudden I lost my house, I lost my kids, and you're out on the curb. So great. I love that dynamic because there are those two views.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Angela, tell everyone how they can reach you if they have questions. Obviously we're nationwide, but there may be some local people that want to get a hold of you or even shoot you an email, whatever it may be. Or you can do counseling via Zoom, whatever it is, but just give them some information if you want, website, whatever you think is appropriate.
Absolutely. So I'm Angela Skirtu. I own St. Louis Marriage Therapy, but I do Zoom and in-person therapy. So you can find me at therapistinstlouis.com. Or if you're just curious and you want to learn a little bit about my approach, I also have a YouTube channel. Just look up Angela Skirtu, Skurtu on YouTube. And I put out little clips, videos all the time of different ideas and strategies for how to work on your relationship. And finally, I actually have 2 books you can potentially read. One is Helping Couples Overcome Infidelity. And the other one is Premarital Counseling, a guide for clinicians. Both are written for both clinicians and and clients, like both. They're written easy enough so as like just a regular person can read it and get something from it. But they're also training therapists for how to provide this work.
Awesome. Well, we just posted your website, I know, in the chat box for everyone. Angela, it was intriguing, amazing, informative, insightful. Thank you so much for joining. And I hope to have you back, and we'll spend some more time talking about it.
All right, great. Thank you for having me.
Great. All right, thanks. All righty, well, we're going to get to some of your questions. I know we spent a little bit more time than normal, but let's get to them, Jonathan. There's a few questions that have been submitted, and we want to try to get those answered. So, Jonathan, I'm just going to ask you real quickly. Pablo's in Maryland and has a son that lives in Virginia with his mom. She's recently started reducing the number of days I can see him every other weekend. There is no court order in place. Would I file for custody in Maryland, where I live, or in Virginia, where she lives?
Great question, Pablo. So almost every state now has this. We've adopted the uniform jurisdiction. And it's an act that goes across most of the states. I think almost every 50 state. Basically, jurisdiction will typically stay in the state that it started in. That's your starting place. If the child has relocated and lives somewhere for more than 6 months, then the new state could obtain the jurisdiction, but there's definitely a process for doing so. So the default would be start where it left off, where the original decree was. That's where your starting place is. But you typically are going to look at the residence of the child. And again, that residence has got to be longer than 6 months before we're going to change which state is handling it.
All right, I'll answer the next one's from Missouri. It says, I just got married. I already pay child support. The new income from my spouse, will it help modify my child support or be used, I'm assuming, against this person? So typically, no. When you calculate, Missouri is a formulaic state where we take the gross income of the payor and the recipient. Where it only comes into play is when you're trying to seek a modification to find, or not a modification, a deviation from the Form 14 is the method to calculate child support, and say that it should be inappropriate. That amount is not just because of X, Y, and Z. They would use that income from a new spouse just to show that you have an offset and a reason why you should be paying child support, but it's not going to be added into your income in that formula in the Form 14. Here's one, Jonathan, from Jeff, California, divorced for 10 years, married for 22, consistently paid spousal and child support, no longer pays child support because they're emancipated. However, the monthly spousal support has remained the same for 4 years. Neither has requested a modification. They're both employed professionals through annual wages. His are probably 2.5 times hers. What's the best strategy to negotiate a step-down schedule that would eliminate that? He would like to eliminate it eventually.
Great question, Jeff. So first of all, most spousal support awards are going to be based on the need of the person receiving that award. Now, different states do have different laws. So I'm going to be answering your question as if you lived in Utah. In Utah, if we're looking at the need of the spouse, we're going to look at number one is her need going down. So as children emancipate, they move out of the house. Now she's not going to be paying as much in food and in some of those children's expenses. So are we going to see an actual decrease in her monthly budget? We could look at things like, did cars get paid off? Did loans and debts get paid off? And so her budget's essentially going over. The second part of it then is the other side is her income going up? In that period of time, now that she's not with kids more, is she working more hours? Does she get raises? And that could be a dollar for dollar change as the income goes up and the need goes down. That's going to be decreasing. The one thing they typically don't look at is your income and kind of whether it went up. That usually isn't used as like a punishment. So let's just say your income was half that when you got divorced, but now you've done really well. Typically, that's not a factor they look at unless they're just looking at, can you help her meet her needs? But typically you don't see it going up as much as we see it going down after the divorce.
Yeah. And in moments like that, I encourage you to schedule that consult, because putting together strategies like that will really help you and put you on the right path. It's the best hour you'll ever invest. You can go to CordellCordell.com to do that. And then one final question, then we have to break. In the middle of a divorce, why does the court use gross income versus net income to calculate support? Not every state does. I know that for a fact. Some use net, some use gross. They use gross income, but the amounts of the child support that are produced, the Supreme Court in Missouri reviews it periodically. They consider that. It's basically what they're setting that child support number after factoring in an average tax break. So they do. Not every state does. Missouri just happens to do that on gross income. But in the calculation of how much should be supported, they do consider what is a typical net income in terms of result of that as well. So I know we went long. We had a lot of great information to cover today. A wonderful guest. Again, check Angela's website out. We'll hope to have her back again. I know we could keep talking on and on about it. And it's a wonderful resource to consider alternatives to divorce. And we just want to make sure that I've always said, a bad marriage is better than a terrible divorce. There are no winners in divorce. It's always degrees of losing. Not everyone walks away with everything that they want. And so it's one to exhaust all resources. We'd love to have a consultation with you, talk more about strategies and support, strategies and modification, and in maybe potentially facing divorce. You can go to CordellCordell.com. You can schedule a consultation right from the website using the calendar there. You don't even have to pick up the phone or talk to anyone. You can do that right now. We'd love to have a chat with you. So until next time, thanks for joining. Have a great rest of the week.